Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kelsey Woodworth, Marketing Manager at SmartLing, and today we have our 7th episode of the reality series where we will be discussing the MQM methodology and translation quality. So I'm excited to announce that today we have with us Alex Janishevsky, our Director of AI and MT Deployments, Valerie Dehant, our Senior Director of Language Services, and Olga Bergovaya, VP of AI and Machine Translation. So thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks for having us.
So quick few notes, this session is going to be recorded today. So if you have to drop early or you get up and you miss something, no worries. We'll send that out later this afternoon. And if you have questions as we go, we will be taking Q&A at the end. So go ahead and drop them in that Q&A tab up in the top right. And we will see those and send them to the speakers at the end of the session. So without further ado, let's get started with our first myth. So myth number 1 is that any native speaker can evaluate quality. What do we think about this?
I think I can start with that. And yes, any native speaker can evaluate quality. What might not be the case is, can any native speaker define what quality is? Quality would mean different things for different people, right? For, say, country manager, in-country sales leaders, quality would probably mean the impact the content has in the field and how the content actually converts into actual business numbers. For a professional linguist, obviously quality would mean a lot of things such as grammatical accuracy or terminology accuracy. For the end user, it would probably mean is it actionable and is it usable? And if we can move maybe to the next slide, I have a very simple question here. And the question is, okay, so is it objective or subjective? When the quality is evaluated, I think the spell of translation industry for years has been the following slide, which is what? Is the translation good or is translation bad? And I think a lot of us who've been in the industry for a while, new to the industry, have seen this. This translation is great and this translation is awful. And then what do you do with this statement, right? Even more so, it applies to machine translation. For years, machine translation has been flawed by default. As much as we're approaching human parity, there is still no such thing as a perfect machine translation or translation with large language models. Each automated translation methodology comes with its own can of worms. So we often see machine translation is very vulnerable when it comes to quality evaluation. So I will present the first very simple set of frameworks, because framework is the key to being able to evaluate quality. Again, those of us who've been in the industry for a while would absolutely recognize it. I believe this framework was initially developed by Taos. There is a way of evaluating. In this case, we're only talking about evaluating machine translation. Again, I want to focus on machine translation because it's super vulnerable. It exposes itself to judgment just because of its flawed by default. So you can evaluate adequacy, right? And you can evaluate fluency. And these are the human evaluation metrics that have been around forever. And as you can see, it degrades, like it's completely imperceivable and not comprehensible, or everything is captured and it's graded from 1 to 5. Now, would you really see an in-country manager or an in-house non-linguistic person going through even that kind of assessment? Then there is even more simple framework where you really judge actionability. Is my translation actionable and usable? Can I actually act on it? And that framework, again, it's a super simple framework. That's something that we at SmartLink provide to our customers when they say, hey, we need to send content to China, and we need to tell our Chinese colleagues, we need to tell us how good the translation is. Again, framework is key, but I am presenting the most simplistic approach to quality evaluation framework. Now, I guess off to my esteemed colleagues here, if you want to add anything, and perhaps we can talk a little bit more about what can be more complex and more comprehensive.
Yeah, so maybe I can expand a little bit more on this idea of the native speaker. Any native speaker can evaluate quality, right? And my take on it was very similar to Olga's, right? Where I would say, well, yes and no, right? And honestly, the reason it's kind of this hedging is it depends on a myriad of factors, right? It depends on things like content type, on audience, on shelf life, on visibility of the content, right? So to give you an example, let's take a look at 3 examples with 2 extreme poles and 1 in the middle, right? So let's talk about something like knowledge bases and forums on one extreme, marketing that's supposed to elicit a very high emotional response on the other extreme, and online documentation in the middle, right? So kind of the framework that Olga was showing, right? Virtually any college educated native speaker of the language could tell you whether a knowledge based article is actionable, whether it's fluent, and very likely can point you to awkward phrasing or grammatical mistakes, right? That part is fine. But when we're talking about online documentation, you really need professional linguists who can evaluate whether this online documentation follows a prescribed client convention and style guide, right? You need someone who actually has a very strong linguistic background in translation. And even more so if you're talking about high touch marketing, right? You really need someone who can appreciate the linguistic tools at their disposal. How can they change this metaphor at rendering this complicated content very accurately, right? So that kind of takes us to the idea of the MQM framework, right? And Valerie's going to talk about that right now. And what's nice about the MQM framework is that it's broad enough and objective enough to handle these 3 disparate use cases.
Right, and really the key here is subjectivity versus objectivity. When you have a native speaker that is not necessarily a linguist, a lot of the time their evaluation of the quality will be highly subjective. So putting a framework in front of them that allows them to really look at objectively at the quality and provide a measure will be important, because then they can just follow the typology, and then this becomes their guide to really review the text. So MQM, also known as multidimensional quality metrics, this is really an error typology framework, way more involved than the frameworks that we were presenting earlier. Now we're looking at error categories, error types for each of these categories, and we are able to assign severities to the errors that we are seeing when reviewing the text. So when the evaluators are going through their translations, as they read, they're able to log errors as they find them. And when they log errors, they choose a severity. And for each severity, we have assigned a weight. So that represents a penalty system. And this is the what is going to be used then to calculate a very objective quality score, because we're going to look at the total penalty points against the word count that is of the sample that is evaluated.
I think, Valerie, what's important to add here also is it's very flexible. Yes. And you can play with the weights and you can make decisions around severity. So you can follow the native or quote unquote vanilla MQM framework, or you can actually assign your own weights depending on what matters for your organization most.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, and where this kind of comes full circle, and you'll see us talk about this in some of the other myths, is those weights then and those labels by human beings are going to be used in order for us to try to train models that will give us predictions, right? So it all becomes very interconnected.
Sure.
Great. Okay, so moving right along then to myth number 2, that machine translation and human translation quality are evaluated differently. Is this true?
Actually, no, and especially at SmartLink we've completely adopted MQM, and we are using the exact same framework when we are looking at translation. So we select a sample of content translated by our translators across all different types of content, and also across different solutions, whether it's professional translation, whether it's AIHT. We look at the sample very in very similar ways. We send those samples to independent reviewers, so that is very important. We've built a team of evaluators, so people who have never worked on the content, and they are not they don't know what they're evaluating, in the sense that they don't know what workflow was used when we were translating. So this is really an important element of our process, because they are completely blind to the solution that was used, and it cannot bias their evaluation. And once we have done the evaluation with two linguists, we send it to a third linguist, who is going to have an arbitrator role whenever there was disagreement between the first two linguists who were looking at the content.
And to Valerie's point, actually, we've done some very interesting internal experiments in terms of bias. When you do present, when the person knows that the person is evaluating machine translation, the person automatically assigns, just being conditioned to, it is machine translation, with so completely different judgment, a completely different assignment of errors and severity of errors, as opposed to when the person knew that they are looking at human translation or post-edited content. So once we removed that, once we went down that blind testing, then things became much more objective. And also, what was very interesting, we also tested evaluation of content that was just translated by MC and content modified by an LLM. And it was also very interesting. If the knowledge is there, then a translator or the evaluator would favor certain output over another. So I'm very much with Valerie on blind evaluation. Not knowing where the content is coming from gives us the most scientifically significant and objective picture. So maybe from here we could talk a little bit about, okay, do you evaluate machine translation and human translation differently? Yes, there is MQM framework, but we're still dealing with automated translation, and there is a lot we want to learn about machine behavior. So I wanted to say a couple of words about the modern landscape for automated translation evaluation. We have our good old BLEU, which has been a metric for many, many years, developed long time ago, and it was initially probably best suited to evaluate statistical machine translation. There's a lot of debate how suitable is BLEU for neural machine translation, and more so for LLM evaluation, because of the things it penalizes. We have Meteor, we have TER, HTER, edit distance. What these metrics have in common, they are text-based. They do take some NLP features and some, like paraphrasing, for instance, into consideration, but they are not semantic evaluation methodologies. And then we have Comet, Labs later, and now the whole school of thought about evaluating quality with large language models. If they can produce good quality, can they equally evaluate quality? And here at SmartLink, we're doing a lot of experimentation around quality estimation with LLMs, and actually we're getting very, very promising results. Not to forget human evaluation. You still want a human to evaluate for utility, actionability, fluency, accuracy within the MQM framework, alongside other evaluation metrics. So, Alex, I know that you wanted to say a couple of words about semantic evaluation. Textual evaluation is probably more transparent. Semantic evaluation, semantic scoring is probably something that tells us more about the nature of the errors and the nature of the engine behavior. So off to you.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of explain how we look at automatic scoring, and how the human being is ultimately always involved as a language co-pilot, right? So Olga was talking about the difference between textual and semantic scoring, right? So on a very basic level, what does it mean? Textual scoring primarily is looking at the difference in characters or words that you need to make to change from an empty output to a post-edited output, right? And what's happening here, the example that you see on the screen, is if you have the word kitten and the word sitting, they're completely, totally different words, completely unrelated, but it takes only 3 characters to get from one to the other, right? So it would make you think that, hey, I've got a very, very low edit distance. I haven't had a lot to do, but cognitively, you had to do quite a lot. The other 2 examples here, I think, are particularly interesting. The difference between guilty and not guilty is 3 characters. The difference between pouring gas or oil into the engine, gas versus oil, is also 3 characters, right? So it makes us think it's not that big of a deal, but whether a defendant is guilty or not guilty is a huge, huge deal, right? Or if you're a tractor company and someone, or an automotive company, someone pouring gas instead of oil into the wrong receptacle, you're going to ruin the car or the tractor, right? So this helps us a little bit, but ultimately what we want to look at is semantic scoring, which is kind of the next slide, right? Yeah, Kelsey, yeah, there we go. Cool. So the idea of semantic scoring, again, I'm not going to go to the details of sentence embeddings, but essentially the long and short of it is words and concepts and sentences that are related to each other are plotted next to each other, right? So what you'll see is the lion is the king of the jungle, the tiger hunts in the forest, right? You can see that they're very close to each other because lions and tigers are close, jungle and forests are close, right? If I'm saying everybody loves New York, it's not even in the same ballpark, right? It's totally, totally different. And we use the same idea when we talk about translation, and you see that on the right-hand side. You have what time is the checkout? You've got the German translation, the Japanese translation. They're close to each other. When I ask, what time is the pool open, right? How late is the pool open? It's not related at all, right? So this actually allows us to see to what degree does the target represent the source, right? Now, coming back to this idea of a language copilot, right? We're looking for statistical outliers, for anomalies, for exceptions, right? We're letting the data guide us. And when we see something that looks suspect, that's when we get a human being involved, right? And human involvement is pivotal, right? Because it helps us to decide where the automatic scoring, be it textual or semantic, is leading us astray, right? That's why it's ultimately this blend of text, semantic, and human, right? And we're going to talk about the next section to how important human beings are in labeling this data and ultimately using this data to build models.
If I may add to this, we do know that one of the biggest blockers in deploying large language models, generative AI across the board, is hallucinations and factual accuracy or inaccuracy. So this methodology is actually perfect for assessing semantic similarity of translation produced or content generated by large language model, because that's an easy way of capturing a hallucination when you see that the model has gone completely astray and the meaning is very far away from the source meaning. Because obviously, Alex, I think one thing we also want to say that it's multilingual, right? It's cross-lingual. So that would be the way for us to evaluate quality. And it's extremely, we do know that neural machine translations tended to dream things up, but obviously LLMs take hallucinations to the next level, while we're delighted to see that hallucination is being mitigated. But this is a great hallucination mitigation technique.
Cool. Okay, if there's nothing else to add. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay, sorry, I thought you said something. All right, well, moving right along then to myth number 3, which is data quality is only used in production. Valerie, what do you think about that?
Well, not only, no. So yes, when you do quality evaluation, you get a lot of data that will inform action items and how to improve your quality, your translation program and so on. But what we see is that the data collected can also inform research and how we progress in all the different models that exist. And that's where arbitration, the step that I mentioned earlier, plays a very essential role in the process. Because when we send a sample to multiple linguists, they don't always agree with each other, and they're going to have either disagreement in the severity of certain errors, or they will not see the same errors at all. So what we found is that by simply using an average score, it was not enough, because we were not reducing all the noise and the biases that existed. So arbitration allows us to focus only on the strings where there are disagreements, and we show those to the third linguist, and in turn it provides us a consistent way to label the errors that are being found, that are then used to machine learning and building and fine tuning our models. I will let Alex and Olga elaborate on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick comment. Arbitration, an average score gives you a score. An average score does not give you a usable label. So then it's really a finger in the sky. Without arbitration, it's a finger in the sky of which error you actually take and which label you actually assign to a particular string. So obviously arbitration, it gives us the actual factual, I guess. It gives us the actual value for what exactly the error is, and it is essential because you do want the models to answer what kind of an error it is. And maybe off to you, Alex, for more details on that, how we actually use MQM labeling in our research and in production implementation.
Yeah. So the reason, the reason we're dwelling on this point so much, right, and the reason it's so important is because we need, much like we need good, reliable, clean data to build machine translation engines, right, to train machine translation engines on top of a Google or Microsoft baseline. The same thing is true of LLMs. The same thing is true of any model that you build, right? So what we saw happening initially before arbitration, when we attempted to build models, those models weren't successful because we were getting conflicting labels of error categories, right? So kind of going back to that first slide where Olga was talking about the subjectivity of good, not good, right? This is good, this is awful, right? What we would get is one translator would say, this is a minor error, and a translator would say, no, this is a critical error, it's the end of life as we know it, right? And then the first one would say, but wait, all I have to do is just change 2 characters and life is good again, right? And then the problem when you try to make a model like that is, what do you tell the model? Is it a critical error and life is over and you stop the presses, or is it a minor error, right? And that's where, because of these conflicting labels, we were running into issues, right? So what arbitration gave us is this one person who comes in and adjudicates and gives us a very, very clear-cut answer and says, I've looked at all of the data, it's this, right? And then we use that data to actually train models, right? And now we're actually seeing very, very promising results based on MQM. So I think the part that's very cool for us is we can take a definition of MQM, we could take all of this labeled data for a myriad of languages, make a model, and then actually feed output to that model and say, is this an error or is this not an error? And it's actually, we're seeing very, very high rates of accuracy, precision, and recall, which gives us promise to say, okay, now if it's an error, we can send it one way. If it's not an error, we can send it another part of the workflow, right? So the stuff that we're working on right now is, we made these models, should these models be specific for each client, right? Or could they be domain models? Like we make a finance model, it fits everything in finance, right? And also, should these models be language dependent or should they be language independent, right? So these are some of the things that we're still working out on, but we're seeing very, very promising results.
Right.
Okay, great. We had some questions come in that I wanted to ask. Previously, we spoke about MT versus HT and how we measure that. So someone asked, would different KPIs apply to machine translation and human translation?
I would imagine we're talking about business KPIs, right? And I think KPIs are directly, when we talk about quality at SmartLing, we talk about fit for purpose, right? And obviously the quality should be fit for purpose and fit for purpose would drive the KPIs. And Alex alluded, for instance, to emotional engagement, right? If the content needs to drive human translated content, transcreated content, needs to drive emotional engagement, needs to contain call to action, then obviously you want to see how many of those actions were completed, be it purchases, be it conversion, be it whatever the business KPIs this content would have, right? How engaged are the users? I don't know, satisfaction, end user satisfaction, and so on and so forth. Now, I would say that the KPI for content types that are really only there to be understood and acted upon, they would probably be if we take support content, for instance, how many support tickets were resolved without pushing it to a live agent. So I think depending on the purpose of the content and how this content was serviced, was it machine translation or was it AIHC process, human in the loop process, the KPIs would be dramatically different because of the purpose of the content.
Okay, great. Thank you. Someone else asked, what can you do about quality within SmartLing? Valerie,
all yours.
For you.
We actually have quite a solid toolkit from a tool allowing you to create that error typology that we were talking about, what we call the schema. There is a tool that allows to log those errors. We then have a UI for arbitration, because it's really important that the evaluators and the translators that actually did the translation communicate and collaborate. And then finally, we have a dashboard that will put all of this together and present MQM scores, and in a very, very granular way, you can look at the data overall for certain time periods, certain projects, certain locales, and see what kind of errors are being logged overall.
I think the beauty of it is also, Valerie, yes, you can get the dashboard, but we get this question quite a lot. Okay, I got my dashboard, but what if I want to drill down? What if I want to really see what's underneath the dashboard and what kind of errors actually build out the picture? Then you also have an option of drilling down and looking at the individual strings and filter them by a particular error type. So you can get the big picture, but if you want to chunk it into smaller pictures, then you can do that as well. So it kind of goes both ways. Data informs the dashboard, and the dashboard informs the data.
Absolutely. And from there, you can form an action plan. Do I have a lot of stylistic errors or terminology errors? Well, maybe my glossary and my style guide need to be a little bit more robust to document my preferences, and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you. And kind of on that same thread of LQA, someone else asks, will you always need a human in the loop for LQA?
I guess I'll start first. So from my perspective, like, yes, absolutely, right. And this goes into our idea of that the human is a language co-pilot, right? Valerie gave very good examples why we need even a third human to adjudicate the work of the first two human beings, because they can conflict with each other, right? And I give examples why to build models we need very, very clean data. I think what you'll see happen, and this is where this idea of a language co-pilot comes in, it's not just a human being labeling data saying I like it or I don't like it. It's actually a human being who is becoming more technologically savvy to say this doesn't work and here's why, or this works and here's why, because that feedback is extremely valuable for people who are actually continuing to fine tune these models, right? So it's not just a binary yes, no, it's let me explain what I'm seeing.
But I would add, and Valerie and Alex, I hope you would agree, that the North Star, the ultimate North Star, is do as much automated MQM labeling as possible and have human validated, right? Because as Alex, you said, we're getting very good, very strong results about using MQM for quality estimation. So eventually we will land at a combination of automation and human, where possibly a heavy lifting will be done by automation, but obviously a human will validate the labels that a model assigns, the MQM labels that a model assigns.
Yeah, it's those exceptions, right? What I would, if I had a crystal ball, right, and I was predicting this, I would say we're going to see the model get better and better and more accurate, but we're still going to have these weird hallucinations, something odd that's going on, some anomaly, and that's where we need the human being to step in and not only identify it, right, as being an anomaly, but give a sense why it's happening, because that'll continue helping us get better.
Yeah. And what I would say is, in the same way, we're using machine translation or AIHT to allow us to translate more. Those types of automated evaluations are going to allow us to evaluate more, because the human process can be quite time consuming. So by developing those models for evaluation, we're really rendering this more scalable at the same way. If we can translate more content, we can now evaluate more content.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think that is a good place to wrap it up. And I just wanted to say that Smartling is preparing to release a white paper that outlines our approach to monitoring quality, this MQM framework that we discussed. So stay tuned. We'll be sending that around as soon as it is ready in the next couple of weeks. And we're really excited about that. And as well, if you would like to join us for the next episode on December 13th, I just dropped the link in the chat. We will be discussing the ethics of AI. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today, and see you again next time.
Thank you.